Major funding for this program has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding has been provided by the Alfred Yerzykovsky Foundation, the J.S. Johnson and Barbara P. Johnson Fund in the New York Community Trust, the Polish-American Congress, the Joyce Foundation, and the Friends of the Struggles for Poland. A complete donor list is available from WNET.
I'm Roger Mudd. The series we are about to present deals with a country whose history stretches back 1,000 years. It enjoyed 800 years of uninterrupted independence. It was for a time the largest and most powerful country in Europe, and yet there were periods when it vanished from the map altogether. The country, of course, is Poland. Its national symbol, the eagle. Today, our common image of Poland is shaped by news reports of strikes and a movement known as Solidarity. But the struggle for Poland, the struggle for an independent Poland, has been going on for almost 200 years. That struggle continues to play a significant role in international politics. For Poland lies at the heart of Europe, on the frontier between the East and the West. To examine the history of this country in the 20th century is to examine a world rarely seen in America, the world of Eastern Europe. Although Poland is in many ways unique, there is perhaps no other country which so clearly reveals the drama and conflicts of communist rule within the countries of the Soviet bloc. The Poles themselves are in language Slavic, like the Russians and the Czechs. In religion, they are Roman Catholic, like many of the peoples of Western Europe. In its days of greatness, Polish territory stretched across Central Europe, embracing not only Poles, but also Germans, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Lithuanians. Poland was also home to the largest and one of the oldest Jewish communities of Europe. Because it was centrally located and because it had no natural borders, Poland has always been exposed to the cross currents of international politics. At the end of the 18th century, the Polish Republic was caught between the rising power of the Prussian Kingdom of Germany and the Tsarist Empire of Russia. Poland was crushed and annihilated. Parts of it were absorbed into Russia, parts into Prussia, and parts into the Austrian Empire. For more than 100 years, Poland virtually disappeared from the map. Repeatedly, its people took up arms to fight for independence. Repeatedly, they were defeated. It seemed that Poland would never rise again. But as we shall see, it did rise. It rose broken and chaotic from the ruins of the First World War.
Hear this, and weigh it well, that according to the divine order, he who has never tasted bitterness will never taste sweetness in heaven.
Once upon a time, Poland was part of the largest and freest commonwealth in Europe. Once upon a time, Poland was torn apart and ruled by foreign emperors. Once upon a time, the Germans turned Poland into a land of death. But Poland is not, as it sometimes seems, a doomed country. This is a story of hope against all odds. The story of Poland reaches to the heart of the 20th century. The palace of the last king of Poland. For centuries, the Polish kings presided rather than ruled over a commonwealth with democratic traditions. The class who held real power were the Polish aristocrats. The greatest nobles were more powerful than the king. They held vast estates and maintained private armies. Even the least of the gentry enjoyed extensive rights and were represented in the Polish parliament. But at the end of the 18th century, crisis came. Poland could not defend itself against the armies of the Russian Tsar. From the west and south, armies of two other empires invaded and occupied its territory. Poland no longer existed. A 20th century lantern slide of Russian Tsar Nicholas II, head of an empire that stretched from the borders of Germany to Japan and Alaska. Most of what had been Poland fell under his autocratic rule. From the palace in St. Petersburg, he ruled absolutely over 130 million people from more than 100 ethnic groups. All rebellions, all democratic protests were crushed. Then in 1904, the Japanese emperor, the Mikado, sent troops to seize Manchuria from Russia. A startled world saw early moving pictures of the Japanese army marching its way to victory. Russia's defeat was stunning. The arrogance of Tsarist rule now proved vulnerable to attack. The specter of modern war rose over an increasingly unstable world. In Russia, communist revolutionaries like Lenin and Trotsky fostered strikes and rebellions against the Tsar. In subjugated Poland, Rosa Luxemburg echoed the call for international revolt. Nationalist leaders arose among the Tsar's Polish subjects. Joseph Pilsudski fought an underground war of liberation. Roman Dmowski called for reconciliation with Russia, hoping that the Tsar would give his Polish territories limited independence. For almost a year, Polish socialists organized strikes and protests against Russian rule.
I had to reply to questions about the geography of Russian Empire. But then suddenly, the door of a classroom opens, in which appear two young men who started shouting, "Children, down with Tsarist Russia! Down with Tsar Nicholas!"
My dzieci w naszym pokoju spałyśmy.
We two sisters were in the room we shared with my mother. We were already in bed, but not quite asleep, expecting my mother to come in. Meanwhile, the maid came and took her nightdress, a toothbrush, and hairbrush. We asked if Mother was not coming back that night. Your mother is at the town hall. This meant she'd been arrested.
I jakieś
She was under arrest for 2 or 3 days, then released.
została zwolniona. Ale inni
Others were detained longer.
To tyle mi się utrwaliło.
What I remember, of course, was that it was all tied up with the question of
Sprawy
Poland.
Polski.
I remember how everybody at home was careful not to antagonize the porter, because he was well aware of the clandestine meetings in our apartment.
The whole administration, so-called civil administration and military and post and everything was under Russian command.
Of course, vodka has quite a lot to do with the softening of the character of the porter, but still there was always that hidden fear. Will he say to the gendarme or not that there were those meetings in our apartment?
I pamiętam,
I remember that there was a revolution, that there were fights, and that a bomb exploded somewhere near the Wiedeński station.
All of Russia was in revolt, especially the Polish territories.
Strikes collapsed at the end of 1905, crushed by force, military force, everywhere. thousands of people were arrested, hanged, sent to Siberia.
The failed revolt was a formative experience for revolutionary leaders throughout Russia. Among them, the ethnic Pole, Joseph Pilsudski. He believed more than ever that armed force could win Polish independence. His political opponent, Roman Dmowski, disagreed. His National Democratic Party, strongly nationalistic, Catholic, and conservative, had opposed the strikes and the uprisings. Dmowski called for compromise with Russia.
He said, I want to talk to the Russia and tell them that if they want peace in the Russian part of Poland, they must give us autonomy, complete political autonomy, because we are trusted by the population, and you will have peace in this part of your empire.
Alarmed by the events of 1905, the Tsar established Russia's first parliament. A constitutional manifesto offered limited political rights and freedom of association. But it was to prove too little and too late. The days of the great autocratic empires were numbered. There was a dangerous gulf between aristocrats and peasants. This tradition-bound and conservative empire was headed toward collapse. To the west was a more modern empire. In 1907, the Tsar visits his distant cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, to inspect the new Imperial German Navy. The ruler of Western Polish territories, Germany had become the most powerful nation in Europe, with a mighty army, an efficient bureaucracy, and the most dynamic industries in the world. Germany had one policy toward its Polish provinces: to make them thoroughly German. In Silesia, German industries boomed. The Poles were hirelings, denied even their language. But there was little hope of rebellion against Germany, its army, and its gold-helmeted emperor, whose power seemed unlimited. The ruler of Polish lands to the south was altogether different. Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria and Hungary, was aging and eccentric. Although allied with the German Kaiser, he allowed his subjects, including Magyars, Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, and Czechs, considerable freedom and autonomy. His Polish territory, the province of Galicia, included the ancient Polish capital of Krakow, a city where Polish culture and traditional ways were kept alive. Jewish traders and artisans, Polish peasants and aristocrats lived in what by the 20th century had become one of the poorest regions of Europe. More than 2 million people had fled its poverty and immigrated. 80% of its population were impoverished peasants. But it was in Galicia that Polish culture and learning found a haven from repression. Krakow was the home of the second oldest university in Eastern Europe. The Jagiellonian University, founded by the Polish king in the 14th century, remained an important center of learning into the 20th, a repository of history where Poles learned of the days of Polish power and independence. In 1910, crowds gathered for the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Grunwald, which had guaranteed Polish independence. Ignacy Paderewski, the famous pianist, led the enthusiastic celebration.
I was brought up in the climate of big patriotic feeling, and everything actually was geared toward one aim, that maybe one day Poland will regain independence, and and we will be one nation again.
In 1910, a new step was taken toward Polish nationhood. A Polish Riflemen's Association, founded in Galicia by Joseph Pilsudski with the approval of the Emperor Franz Joseph. The lesson of the failed revolt against Russia 5 years before was not lost on Pilsudski. Now, with Austrian support, he would rekindle Polish military traditions.
He was that unearthly phenomenon suddenly taking form and inciting us, encouraging us with his supreme charm of persuasion to do things which seemed above us in our sane moments.
In February 1914, Pilsudski predicted the collapse of the three empires that controlled Polish territories.
War is unavoidable. What's important for us Poles is that for the first time since the partitions, the Germans will fight the Russians and vice versa. Do you realize how big it is, our chance now?
On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, paid an official visit to Sarajevo in the Balkans. The area was seething with nationalist discontent. The Archduke and his wife were assassinated. Austria-Hungary blamed the small Serbian state. Russia mobilized her army in support of Serbia. Germany mobilized in support of Austria. Soon the world was at war. Imperial Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire went to battle against a former ally, Nicholas II. The Tsar blessed his army and vowed never to surrender. Russia's ally, France, entered the war against the Kaiser. When the German army moved against France and invaded Belgium, Britain too entered the war. Pilsudski now transformed his Riflemen's Association into a fighting force under Austrian control.
I wanted Poland, who had forgotten the sword since 1863, to see it flashing in the hands of her own soldiers.
Pilsudski hoped for a Polish uprising against Russia. He pretended that he represented an underground government in Warsaw. Taking 400 troops, he invaded Tsarist-occupied territory. The population ignored him. Pilsudski was forced to retreat.
It pains me too much, the brutal truth of the weakness and slavishness of my nation, which sedulously sought dependence on and obedience to foreigners. In 1914, when war burst upon the world, the Polish cause was not included amongst those for which men went out to shed streams and rivers of blood.
2 million Poles fought as soldiers in the armies of Russia, Germany, and Austria. They confronted each other as enemies on the battlefield. Poland, the meeting point of three empires, became a killing ground, drenched with blood, swarming with troops and refugees.
Next to our train was a Red Cross train, and because it was a hot summer night, all the windows were lowered. I could hear the mourning and cursing and yelling of the wounded soldiers in the Red Cross train. And it was a terrible thing to listen to. And my father even told me, look, hurry up and close the window so your mother wouldn't hear it.
We are kept apart, my brother, by a fate that we can't deny. From our two opposing dugouts, we stare each other in the eye. In the trenches, filled with groaning, alert to the shell fire's whine, we stand and confront each other. I'm your enemy. You are mine.
Nieszczęsna Polsko, cóż doczekała.
Unhappy Poland, what fate has befallen you?
Minęły czasy.
Gone are the times and moments of peace. King has declared war upon king.
Że nie plugi, orze
It's not
ziemi
plows that till the Polish soil, but guns and bombs. These shells bring death and destruction to villages and towns.
Casualties mounted. The Poles, torn and suffering, debated which way to turn in search of independence. Should they ally with Germany and Austria, as Joseph Pilsudski argued, or with Russia, as Roman Dmowski and his National Democrats believed? To win Polish support, the Tsar announced,
Poles, the hour has struck. Under the scepter of the Russian Emperor, Poland will be reborn, free in her own faith, language, and self-rule.
Within a year of war, however, the Russian army was in retreat. In search of support for Polish independence, Roman Dmowski traveled to France, England, and the United States. Meanwhile, Joseph Pilsudski continued his fight against the Tsar. He recruited saboteurs.
I joined the underground movement, which was called the Polish Military Organization. And in that, there was a special mobile unit created towards diversion against the Russians. We would have a stock of arms, and we would look after these arms. We'd